Today's world, a place of contrast and challenge, where great demands are being made on people everywhere. Faced with these demands, many of us have searched for new ways to look at life and what it means. And we have begun to realize there is more to ourselves, the world, and the universe than what we have known before. When we look at the grandeur and immensity of this universe, it is natural to ask, where did all of this come from? Where did life come from? Who am I? What am I? Why am I here? What purpose does life have?
Questions like these have been asked for thousands of years by people everywhere, and they were of special interest to a young boy born in the northeastern part of the United States in the winter of 1887. A boy who would become a lifelong student of philosophy and religion and develop a practical spiritual approach to successful living, the science of mind.
That young boy was Ernest Holmes, who had one of nature's loveliest settings in which to raise his endless questions about life, God, and the mysteries of the universe. From pioneer-like beginnings, Ernest Holmes would grow to take his place as one of the great spiritual teachers of this century and become recognized internationally for his contribution to religious thought. Join us now as we take a brief pictorial journey through the life of Ernest Holmes.
On a farm near this rural town of Lincoln, Maine, Ernest S. Holmes was born January 21st, 1887. He was the youngest of Anna and William Holmes' 9 sons. Ernest was a vital, well-adjusted, thoroughly happy, healthy schoolboy with a bright, inquiring mind and a great sense of mischief and fun. Ernest was curious about everything. He was always asking why, testing the patience of his older brothers with his appetite for knowledge.
He was always an original thinker, and as he matured into his teen years, he focused more and more on life and religion. He also sought knowledge from every source, turning it over in his mind, accepting or rejecting the new information. Ernest read widely from the writings of philosophers, historians, psychologists, and metaphysicians. As more questions were answered, more questions needed to be asked. The writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson had a profound effect on Ernest Holmes' thought. They convinced him that life has purpose and meaning, and that there is endless happiness in store for those who understand its progressive unfoldment. He dedicated his life to a greater understanding of this unfoldment.
Ernest also enjoyed being with people and entertaining them. His love of performing led him to Boston in 1911, where he studied elocution at the Leland Powers School. He became a professional entertainer, giving readings of plays and poetry on the professional lecture circuit. A major change occurred in Ernest's life in 1912 when he visited his mother and his brother Fenwick in Venice, California. He loved California and became a lifelong resident of the Los Angeles area. Ernest assisted in Fenwick's church activities and worked for the city of Venice. He began to give informal lectures on metaphysics in people's homes. Many of these people sought his help for metaphysical healing.
Ernest's philosophy continued to mature during the next few years. Before moving to California, he had become acquainted with the metaphysical thinking of Phineas Quimby and Mary Baker Eddy. In Venice, he continued his study of world religions and sought out the writings of other metaphysical authors. In 1914, on a visit to a metaphysical library, Ernest found the writings of Thomas Troward, who was to have a major influence on his philosophy. The only other person to have such an impact was the highly regarded teacher of mysticism, Emma Curtis Hopkins. By 1917, so many people were interested in his lectures and healing practice that he opened an office. He also began to give Sunday lectures at a public auditorium in downtown Los Angeles.
During this same year, he and Fenwick opened a home in Long Beach for convalescents. Fenwick described this enterprise as an important opportunity to exercise the power of the word in controlling circumstances. Earlier in Venice, Ernest had conducted personal healing and private teaching in what he called a home of health. Over the next few years, Ernest Holmes was an increasingly popular lecturer in California. He also gave short courses on what he called mental and spiritual science. His extensive healing practice continued to grow.
Ernest Holmes was a great teacher, clear, concise, original. He was a great presence, too, simple and natural. He never stopped learning, and he never stopped growing. In 1919, he published his first books, Creative Mind and Creative Mind and Success. He continued to write and soon began work on a major book titled The Science of Mind, which was published in 1926. It became the textbook of his new philosophy and was revised and updated in 1938.
The need for an organization to support the teaching, lecturing, and healing work of the science of mind soon became evident, and in 1927 Ernest Holmes established the Institute of Religious Science and School of Philosophy in Los Angeles. He received tremendous support for the Institute from his large circle of friends. One of these was Reginald Armour, who, over a 45-year period, was first a friend, later a student, and then, when he joined the Institute staff, a teacher, practitioner, and colleague.
Also in 1927, Ernest published the first issue of Science of Mind magazine, which has been in continuous monthly publication ever since. In 1928, Ernest and a scientist closely associated with him began the publication of a scholarly periodical titled The Quarterly Journal of Science, Religion, and Philosophy. Later, this journal was turned over to the University of Southern California for ongoing publication.
After 7 years at its first location, the Institute moved its administrative offices and classes to 6th Street and New Hampshire Avenue in Los Angeles. Attendance at the Sunday lectures, classes, and healing services continued to grow. The Sunday lectures outgrew several auditoriums as thousands attended each week.
Ernest Holmes wrote many books. In addition, his lectures were transcribed, then later edited and published as anthologies. Several honorary degrees were conferred upon him. Internationally recognized scholars in the fields of religion, philosophy, and science knew him well and held him in high regard.
People were always first with Ernest. He loved them all. One of the most important persons in his life was his mother, Anna. She was always keenly interested in her son's developing philosophy, since she had read metaphysical books throughout her life. But it wasn't until she was in her 60s that she embraced the science of mind philosophy and became a practitioner. She lived to the age of 99. The great love of Ernest's life was Hazel Foster, whom he married in 1927. She and Ernest enjoyed many activities together, the opera, the theater, and their home was always a center for entertainment. She was an elegant lady with a deep understanding of spiritual principles. Hazel was Ernest's confidant, his practitioner, and his mentor for 30 years. She made her transition in 1957.
Throughout the years, Ernest and his brother Fenwick collaborated in lecturing and writing. Their final work together was an epic poem, The Voice Celestial, published in 1960. Ernest was always interested in learning from other people, whether in formal settings or informally in everyday conversation. He enjoyed discussing philosophy, religion, and science with university professors, ministers, doctors, business executives, neighbors, and students. The conversations might take place on campuses, conference grounds, the Institute offices, or in his home.
When he was not meditating, counseling, doing spiritual mind treatment, or writing, one could always find Ernest with people. His hobby was people. He loved them whether they were rich or poor, sick or well, family or friend, or just passers-by. He believed in the goodness of life and in the wholeness of its experience and expression. He saw the perfection in each person. Ernest Holmes was a man with faith in the power of individuals to change the conditions of their lives.
During the summer conferences at Asilomar on California's Monterey Peninsula, Ernest roamed the grounds conversing with everyone who wished a moment of his time. These conferences also gave him the opportunity to be out in nature. Since childhood, Ernest had found nature one of his greatest teachers, for he knew that God manifests as everything in the universe. One of his favorite sayings was, "There is no spot where God is not."
Men and women from the entertainment world have always been drawn to the science of mind philosophy because of its emphasis on the creative power within each individual. Movie stars, directors, writers, musicians, actors, and television personalities came to Ernest's Sunday lectures, took classes, or received private instruction in the science of mind from him.
The fun-loving young Ernest never left the man. Often it was said that he had a mischievous look about him, or that he was impish. He felt all life was to be enjoyed, and he did his best to enjoy it. The Holmes family had people around at all times. Ernest loved to cook, and he liked nothing better than to have friends over for dinner and then sit before a fire and engage in conversation about life and God and human experience.
Ernest and Hazel always lived in large houses. Their last home was a stately mansion filled with exquisite antiques and an impressive collection of Oriental art. It provided ample space for entertaining all their relatives and friends. Ernest was constantly involved in a variety of functions, special celebrations in his honor, graduation ceremonies, weddings, and church dedications.
The dedication of Founders Church of Religious Science in Los Angeles was very special to Ernest. He and his close friend and colleague, Dr. William H.D. Hornaday, had long dreamed and planned for this church. Groundbreaking ceremonies were attended by many dignitaries, and when the church was dedicated in January 1960, Dr. Hornaday became its minister. Ernest Holmes was at the Institute daily. Through his lectures, books, home study courses, radio and television programs, and Science of Mind magazine, he presented his philosophy to an expanding international audience.
But Ernest was not alone in this regard. Over the years, thousands of people had studied at the Institute of Religious Science, and many of them graduated as practitioners and ministers, carrying on his work of teaching and healing. In 1953, the name of the Institute of Religious Science was changed to Church of Religious Science, and in 1967 to United Church of Religious Science. Today, the Science of Mind philosophy continues to be taught and supported by two organizations, the United Church of Religious Science and Religious Science International.
The Science of Mind philosophy has met with great success because it is based solidly on timeless truths about our spiritual nature. It presents these truths clearly and directly. Perhaps most important, it is practical. It helps people. Every year, hundreds of thousands worldwide experience positive changes in their lives through studying and applying Science of Mind teachings.
What was Ernest Holmes like in person? The best example is to be found in a live television program recorded in the mid-1950s in which Ernest was teaching the basics of his philosophy.
We are going to come to a place where we believe in the power greater than we are, believe in ourselves because we know it, and believe even right down to the word we're using, that our own thought, our own meditation or prayer, whatever you choose to call it, will convince everything within us that seems to doubt. Perhaps out of all the doubt and the yearning and the longing, you and I will come to know there is a power greater than you are, than I am, and we can use it.
Ernest Holmes made his transition on April 7th, 1960. He left an enduring legacy, a way of life he called the Science of Mind. He sought to help people be happy, have peace, enjoy abundance, and above all, know their relationship to the ultimate spiritual presence and power of the universe. Today, his work continues through every person whose life has been touched by the Science of Mind. Because of Ernest Holmes, countless millions have discovered, and countless millions more will discover, a rewarding awareness of their infinite spiritual potential.